Good morning to all. So, in the last lecture, we discussed about various state management techniques in ASP.NET. Is it audible properly? Okay. So, yeah. So we started with the view state technique, which is one page level technique, where you can retain the values of the controls and variables on the single page. Then we discussed about the query string and cookie techniques. So in query string, you can pass the value from one page to other page using the technique to URL. In URL, you have to write the name of the key and value which you want to pass. And on the receiving page, you can get those values back. Then there was a cross-page posting method. So in cross-page posting, you have an object of previous page. You have object of previous page. So it is possible if you are going from one page to other page through Pushback URL property of the button. So if you are going from one page to other page, then the receiving page will have a previous page object, which will take a reference to the previous page. And then you can find the controls on the previous page and get those values in the current page. So today I have made a small application on query string, cross-page posting, and view state that I will show you first, and then we will see session variable. So you can see this form, web form 1. So in this web form 1, I have one text box control where I am entering some value and some submit button. If you look at the source of the submit button, you can see that I have given the postback URL property. So it means that when that button is clicked, go to webform2.aspx, right? That's it from the first page. Now I want to go to webform2.aspx, and what I want is I want this value on webform2. Okay. So in webform2, in the design part, I have just one label. I have just one label on webform2, and in the page load method of webform2, I am getting the value from the previous page, right? So you can see that I have a previous page object available with me. I am checking that if it is not null, then and then I have to operate this if part. So if the previous page object is not null, then what you do, you create a new text box object, because the value which we want to retrieve is type of text box. The value which we want to retrieve is a type of text box. So text box text name is equal to text box of, this is casting, right? So I'm casting what? I'm casting previous page dot find control. Okay. So go to previous page and find the control with ID text box 1. So if you see the previous page, this text box has ID of text box 1, right? So the reference of this text box will be given to the object which we have created in page 2, and then you can get the text property. So this is a very simple example. Also, let me run webform 1 first. So I'm writing any data here. I press submit. So this is the data from the previous page, right? So this is how you are. This is web form 2. So through this technique, you can pass anything from one page to other page. It's not like you can only pass a reference of the control. You can pass the entire variable, but you need to write a property for that in the previous page. I think you are aware about properties in C#, right? So you need to create a property in the source page, and that property can be retrieved in another page using previous page object. So this is a cross page posting technique, right? Now, what is another example? So another example is, let me run the page first, right? So this is another page, web form 3. So you can see what is happening when I click the button. Okay, so it is incrementing this count. Now try to do it try to think about this without using any state management technique. It will not work, because if you define any variable integer a, b, c like that, then as soon as the page is posted back, the value of this variable will be lost. Okay, because I am clicking, when I click the button, the page will be post back. Okay, so here I am retaining the values. Okay, I am retaining the values of the page. So here if I refresh, then the value will be again reset. Okay, so if the page is posted back, then the count is incrementing. So what I'm using over here is the concept of view state. I'm using the concept of view state, and I'm writing my code on the button click event. Okay, I'm writing the code on button click event. So this is the code, the button click event. Before that, I'm also doing the initialization. Okay, so carefully see how I have done the initialization. So if not is post back, a view state of count equal to 0. It means that when the page will be loaded for the first time, when the page will be loaded for the first time or not as a part of post back, then the count will be reset to 0. And every time when the button is clicked, the count variable will be incremented. But see, it is not normal count variable, it is a view state variable, right? It is a view state variable. But since I want to increment it, since I want to do some arithmetic operations, I am casting it into integer. So this can be done. You can pass anything to view state also. So that is the example of view state. And next is the example of query string. Very simple. So in my query string, I have one text box and I have one button. So when I double click my button, what I should do, I should transfer the values from one page to other page using query string. So as we discussed in the last lecture, for doing the query string transfer, we have to write the URL. So query2.aspx, that is the name of the page where I want to go. Question mark indicates the starting of the query string values, and value equal to textbox1.text. Okay, so the entire string will be query2.aspx question mark val equal to whatever value you write in the text box. So that is the sending part. And obviously in the receiving end, so in the receiving end where I have to write the code, I will write the code in the page load method. So on the receiver page, I have created one page query2.aspx, and I am getting the values from the request object. Okay, I'm getting the values from the request object. So request.queryString, then in the bracket name of the key. So in our case, the name of the key was VAL for toString. So in this way, you can pass the value using query string. Right? So this is a demo of all these three methods right in the chat window, so everybody can see. So as I discussed, if you want to pass any sensitive information, then we should not use query string. And if you are using query string, then you can use the encoding technique. So you can explore it yourself. Now all of you see the question on chat window that why I check the is post back, why I check the is post back condition. See, when button is clicked, every time the page load method will also be called as per page life cycle. Okay, as per page life cycle, every time the page load method will also be called. So if I'm not checking this condition, then what will happen? Every time when the button is clicked, the page load method will be invoked and view state will be uh, initialized to null. Okay, so our count will not increase. And when we are doing refresh, it treats it as first time loading. Okay, what is postback? Postback is caused by any control on the page. Post is caused by any control on the page. When we refresh the page, it's not postback. It is the actual loading. What is the name? Reloading. Refresh means reload. So every time it will be reloaded. So that is why we are checking this condition. So I want to explicitly tell that if the page is loaded for the first time or if the page is reloaded, then and then I have to initialize the count to 0. Otherwise, I have to skip that if part. Okay. So you can also check through debugging. Do you know how to do debugging in Visual Studio? Breakpoint is you have done. Yes. And then single step. Any action on the page will consider as postback. No, like any action means one is button click. Yes. So see, every button has a default characteristics that it will cause the postback event. Okay. It will do the postback because that is the job of button, right?
But if there are two buttons, and if you want like two different counters, for example, in one page only if you want two different buttons, then if any button will be clicked, it will be postback only.
Yes.
And then like both of them will be incremented.
Yes, but only one method will be executed, right? Whether button one click or button two click for.
It's not specific to a button.
No. Postback is
Specific to a page.
yes. Postback is only event, but it can be caused by many different parameters. One is button click, then one is uh, the text change event, the radio button selected index change event. See, each control on the page has a property auto postback. If it is set to true, then that control, whenever you make any change in the control, it will cause the postback. Okay. So you can try to replicate the scenario in your machine and see if what happens if you are having any doubts, and also try to remove this if part and then see what is the output. And if you still do not understand, then put breakpoint and see that when which particular method is getting executed. So that can be the idea. Still in the lab session you can explore more on this. But yeah, so we have already done the cookies part. We have already done the cookies. So as I discussed, cookies are of two types. One is persistent cookie and second is non-persistent cookie. It means the persistent cookie means it will stay on the user machine forever unless you delete it somehow. A non-persistent cookie will be deleted as soon as the session is over. The way to create cookie is to create a cookie object, HTTP cookie, and then write the key and value with the object name. And you can set the expires property to indicate that when the cookie will be expired. After 1 year, in this case, the cookie will be expired. If you do not give anything, then by default the cookie will be expired as soon as the session is over. So that is the cookie example which we have seen. And the last and most used technique is session state or session variable. So as you know, an application might need to store and access complex information such as custom data objects which can't be easily persisted to a cookie or sent through a query string. So now, as you know, in the query string or even in the cookies, what we can store, we can store only text information. We can only store the text information. Like here, you can see that only text information is stored, like preferences and customer username, password, etc. In the query string also you can store normal plain text, but if you want to store more complex objects like a list or a database object or a dictionary that you want to store, then it is preferable to use a session variable. It is preferable to use a session variable. Yeah, if you describe the time of the cookie, then it will be persistent as per the time defined. Okay, persistent doesn't mean forever. It depends on the time that you have given, but at least it will not be destroyed as soon as the session is closed. Okay, so session state is one of the uh, main features of ASP.NET. It allows you to store any type of data in the memory of the server. So now you can see that it is a pure server side session management technique. It is a server side session management technique. Whatever objects, whatever data structures you save in the session variable, they will be stored on the server. The information is protected because it is never transmitted to a client, and it is uniquely bound to a specific session, right? So it is also helpful to store the session specific data. Suppose I want to store my username and you are logging into the same website. So you have your own username. So that will be different. So always remember that in the session variable, the data will be session specific or the data will be user specific. Okay. Every client that accesses the application has a different session and a distinct collection of information. So you can store any kind of data in the session variable, and uh, that will be session wise. It will be per session per user. So how session is treated internally? So ASP.NET tracks each session by using a unique ID that is of 120 bit. It depends on the version of ASP.NET, but ASP.NET uses a special algorithm to generate this value, and it guarantees that for the same web application, different sessions have unique session IDs. So you don't need to worry about all these things. And the security part, when the client presents the session ID, the ASP.NET looks up for the session on the server side, retrieves the objects that you stored in the session, and places them into a special collection so that they can be accessed by the user code. Okay. So when you create a session, when you create a new session variable, internally a session ID of 120 bit is assigned, and next time when you try to access the same session variables, you will be uh, you will be given those values back as per your requirement. Now for this system to work, the client must present the appropriate session ID with each request, right? Because you are making different requests to the server. So every time you need to give your session ID to the server. Now how you will give it? So either you can give your session ID to the server via cookies, or you can give it via URL, right? Otherwise, internally there is no way to pass the values to the server, right? So you can pass those values to the server. And from the user's perspective, from the user's perspective, when you want to access the session, then there is a system.web.session_state class which is provided in the ASP.NET page, and the format for this is session of key equal to value. Okay, session of key equal to value. Yeah. Now, yes. So there is a question on how the value is passed. So if you are passing values using URL, it will be internally encoded. The value will be internally encoded like query string, but in query string default encoding is not there. Okay, you have to do it. But here in session, you don't need to do anything. Even you don't need to pass the session ID. You don't know your session ID. Everything is maintained internally, and whatever encoding decoding is there, that is also maintained internally. So when to close the session? So one possibility is when user closes the browser, session is uh, the data of the session is lost. If the user accesses the same page through a different browser, then also session data may be lost. If session timeout occurs, then also session will be terminated. And the most useful way is to manually terminate the session, that is using session.abandon method. Okay, so session.abandon method is useful when you do the logout kind of functionality. So when you do the logout of the system, so you cannot tell the user that if you want to log out, just close the browser. No, you need to put the link, and when that link is clicked, you should be actually logged out. So manually you have to kill the session. So remember how to kill the session is using session.abandon method. Now every session variable, the HTTP session state has following members. One is count, then cookieless, is cookieless, keys, mode, session ID, timeout, abandon, and clear. So these are the different properties and methods which we can use for doing different tasks with our session variable. We'll see that in the example, but just from the name itself, count means it will count that how many values are there inside the session variable, whether it is using cookies or not, is cookieless, how many keys are there, which keys are there, what is the mode we will see, what is the session ID, what is the session timeout, abandon and clear. What is abandon and what is clear? Abandon means session object will be killed. Session.abandon means session uh, value will be killed, session object will be killed, and clear means only the values will be erased. Okay, only values will be erased, but still the session is there. First, let's see one example. So there is nothing like, let's modify the query string example only. So suppose we want to use the session over here. So what we'll do, we'll just create a session variable. So we'll write session of value equal to xbox1.text. Okay, and now you want to go from query 2 to query 1 to query 2 dot aspx. Okay, so if I write something, oh yeah, obviously, because on the receiving side I have to get the values in the session. So on the receiving side I don't have any query string. What I'll write, session of, what was the name, value. So in this way, you can get the values back. If you use another browser, then the value will be different. Okay, it's not like, so let's say I'm using another browser here. Here it will pass a different value. So it is a session specific value. So session of value for this session is hello, and session of value for this session in the another browser is 256. And the good thing is that this can be accessed from any page. Okay, this can be accessed from any page, not like query string or cross page posting where you need to know that which was the previous page. So this can be accessed from anywhere, and you can also see that there is no mention of these values in URL. Okay, so it is less risky. Okay, because you don't know where the values are coming. No, you cannot see the session. Like even cookies also, it will be difficult to see the cookies, but session you cannot see. But if session is internally using cookies, then you can see the cookie file that will store the session, but the values will be encrypted. You will not be able to see actual content. So that's why it is less risky, and the actual storage of values will be on the server side. The actual storage of values will be on the server side. The default session timeout. Let's say I'm closing this browser and again getting the page. So you can see it is not giving me the values back. So I need to go to query one page again. I think application has stopped. Yeah, it is there. I can give another value. You can get the value. So it is changing the values as and when you open the browser, a new session will be created. Now, how the session is maintained? So uh, let's see each of these properties. First is count. First is count. So it provides the number of items in the current session collection. Right now, I had only one value. Is cookie less? It says that whether the session is tracked with cookie or URL. So if is cookie less is true, then it is doing using URL. If is cookie less is false, then it is doing using cookies. You need to find out yourself that which is the default method, cookies or URL. Is new session, it means it identifies whether the session was created only for the current request or if it is a new session. Then keys means it will get the collection of all the keys. Now mode. This mode is important. Why? Because it provides an enumerated values that explains how ASP.NET stores the session state information. This storage mode is determined based on the web.config file settings. Okay. So you know that the values of the session is stored on server side, but on server side also how it is stored, that will be determined by mode parameter. Session ID will give you your ID if you want. Timeout means it will determine that if the user is idle for this much amount, then session should be automatically terminated. And abandon and clear we have already seen. Okay. Now you can configure session state yourself. You can configure session state yourself through web.config file for your current application. The configuration file allows you to set various advanced options. So this is the example. This is the example of how you can set the session state. Okay. So I think you already know what is web.config file. It is available in all the applications. It is, if it is not available, you can add it manually. Okay, here it is not available, so I'll need to add from this menu, add a It is there. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it is there. So this web.config file, you can add a session state uh, tag. You can add a session state tag and do this kind of configuration. Now this all things will not make more sense because here I have configured my session state so that the values of the session variable will be stored in a database. It will be stored in the database. So that database we have to configure. Yeah. So this is the values of cookie-less parameter. These are the values of cookie-less parameter. If it is set to cookie-less, use cookie-less, then cookies are, sorry, if it is set to use cookies, then cookies will be always used, even if the browser or device doesn't support cookies or they are disabled. This is the default behavior. So as I asked the question, this is the answer, right? So by default, the session variables in ASP.NET is tracked using cookies. If the device doesn't support cookies, session information will be lost and you will not get the desired output. You will not get the desired output. The second method is use URI. So in that case, cookies are never used regardless of the capabilities of the browser. Instead, the session ID is stored in the URL. The session ID is stored in the URL. So that you need to give over here, right? Session state uh, session state tag. Let's say here inside the system.web, I need to create session state tag, right? Inside the session state, I have to write these values, right? Cookieless equal to use cookies or use URI. So here you can, if you write use URI, then it will use the URL method. Similarly, you can the second is mode. The second is mode. So mode is equal to, you can see the values of mode is custom in proc of SQL server or state server. So what is mode? So mode is telling you that how the values are stored on the server side, how the values are stored on the server side. Yeah, so if you, there is a question, if user copies a URL to other browser, same session will be used. So as per the rule, when you change the browser, a new session will be created, right? But still you can verify this when you know, so print a session ID and then do it on the another browser and see if it is same or not. So it depends on the implementation of the system, right? Like in Gmail, if you open Gmail in Chrome, then close the Chrome browser without sign out. Then if you open Gmail in Firefox, then what will happen? Uh, so I think there will be still the session going on, right? You don't have to sign in again. It depends. It depends on the application. Whereas in some applications, the new session has to be started. The default behavior here in ASP.NET is every time when you change the browser, a new session will be created. So coming back to session mode, the first mode is in proc mode. The first mode is in proc mode. What is in proc mode? In proc is the default mode and it makes the most sense for the small websites it instructs the information to be stored in the same process as ASP.NET Worker thread, which provides the best performance but least durability. If you restart your server, the state information will be lost. Okay. So when you run your web application, suppose web application 1, so there is one thread for web application 1 in your server memory. So here in this mode, the value of session will also be stored in the same thread, web application 1 thread. So eventually when you close the server, the web application 1 thread will be destroyed and your session will also be destroyed. Session values will also be destroyed. The another mode is state server. With this setting, ASP.NET will use a separate Windows service for state management. This service runs on the same web server, but it's outside the main ASP.NET process, which gives it a basic level of protection if the ASP.NET process needs to be restarted. So suppose you are attending some online exam, right? You are attending some online exam and you have some time, 30 minutes or 1 hour. Let's say there is a power cut in between. So what should be the ideal behavior when you restart after power cut? You should get the time at which you stopped, right? So it will happen if you use this kind of mode. Otherwise, what will happen? Because your application was destroyed, the session will also destroy, and you need to again restart the test. So you need to store your session values outside the process of your web application, outside the process of your web application, so that even if your application crashes or something happens to your application process, then also the session values are safe in the another process. The session values are safe in the another process. So this is least secure session mode. Session mode in proc is least secure. State server is more reliable or more durable. And last is SQL server. Last is SQL server. So in the SQL server, what will happen? Whatever information of your session you are storing, that will be stored in the SQL server database. Now that database will be either created by you. You can create the database and configure it, or it will be created by .NET framework internally. So depending upon your choice, this option can also be there. So this is useful when you want to store your when you want to store some organized information in the session variable, because database is used to basically store the information in more organized manner. So if you want to store some data in more organized manner, and if you want to use it later on also, and you want to separate it from the current web server, because what will happen is as soon as you use SQL database, the values will be stored in the another server, that is database server. So now you are completely isolating the session values from your application into the another database server. So that is the most secure option. So you can try that once you learn about databases. Now see this slide, it basically gives you the comparison between view state, query string, and cookies. And also we have another two methods in the next slide. So I'll explain each parameter, then the values you can analyze yourself. First parameter is which data types are allowed. Okay. Second parameter is storage type, storage location. The third parameter is lifetime. It means that for how much time your values will be persisted. The next parameter is scope. It means whether the whether the technique is for only one page or for more than one pages. Then the performance concern, that if you use this method, then will the performance of your application affected or not? In any case, you would like to have good performance from your web application. Then typical use, that is the most important thing to know that when to use which particular technique, right? So see, analyze these values yourself. Then I will go to next slide. So all the methods are having their own limitations and advantages. Depends upon your preference and your use. You can choose any of these methods. This is the next session state and application state. So today we have not discussed the application state, but I think we have already discussed it while using the global.asx file. So because basically application state is one step ahead of session state. For session state, you have session specific data. It means for user one, it has a data of user one. For user two, it is a data of user two. For application state, everything is global. Okay, there is only one copy of the data. So that is the last column, application state. So you can see cross page posting is not part of this comparison because it is less used, and also little bit complex to use because you need to remember the control names from the previous page and all that. The most preferred one will be always session state for any task. So there is a question in chat, which session mode is having high performance. So I cannot give any one answer. So I have already given this performance implication row, which you can study and decide yourself. But why there is no answer is because it depends on the application. Suppose you want to store one key, product ID, right? You want to store product ID from one page to other page. And in doing that, you are using session state and with SQL database. Then I will say that performance will be impacted because for doing very small tasks, you are using a very complex method. But suppose you have to store card details of the user, debit card details, and then you are using query string, so it is less secure. So performance doesn't matter there. So there is no one answer to this, but depends on which application you are using. You have to choose the data. You have to choose the session management technique. Now, uh, now write one application. So open your note and note down the application. Giving you abstract information, then whatever you feel you can write. There is one page, login.aspx. Okay, there is one page, login.aspx. It stores, it asks for username and password. Okay, username and password. When you click login, if you username and password is correct, a new session is created. If username and password and I am redirected to one page called product.aspx. Product.aspx. Of the product. So there is some way of selecting the category, like electronics category or home accessories, etc. You can create those categories. When I select any category, suppose I select electric, then the products from electrical category should be listed. I'm not telling you which controls to use. It's up to you. You have to decide. And corresponding price of the product should also be shown somehow. Okay. Then user can select one or more product. User can select one or more product. And click on submit button. Click on submit button. So you will get a page, confirmation.aspx, whatever name you want to give. I am giving it confirmation.aspx. This page will show me, this page will display username, the products that user has selected with their price, and the final amount that user needs to pay. Okay. The final page, confirmation.aspx, shows username, then all the products that user has selected, and then the final amount that he needs to pay. Now you can see there are 3 pages, 1, 2, 3. From first page, you need to pass username and password. You need to check, and then if it is correct, then create a session. So you need to store something in session. On the second page, there are a lot of information like category and product names and their price. User can select one or more products. So that information should be also stored somewhere, and that should be passed to next page. On the next page, everything should be retrieved, and the final price should be calculated by doing the sum of all the prices, and it should be displayed. So from passing the data of all the items from second page to third page, you can create an object. Okay. So try to create an object of product that has 2 properties, product name and product price, and store that entire product object in the session and pass that from page 2 to page 3. Suppose I am selecting 3 products. I am selecting laptop, USB pen drive, and Bluetooth earphone. So 3 objects should be created, and all those objects must be passed from page 2 to page 3. So what you can do, you can create objects, and then you can create list of objects. Okay, are you aware about list of objects? Yes, I mean you are aware about list, right? So just like you create list of integers, create list of objects, and then pass that list from page 2 to page 3 using session variable. As per your understanding, you can do modification in this application. So try that in the lab whenever you get the time, or right now if you are free, or in the afternoon session, you can try this application. So here we complete the session management topic. From next lecture, we'll start discussion on database, SQL Server and ADO.NET database, which will take 1 week. And then we'll see the security part, authentication and authorization. So that will complete the basic .NET framework part. Okay, so let's stop here.